shadows of the rectory. Just at the window, that window leads to the yard in the woods. And I'm looking and I see this dog enter the yard. And I'm just watching this dog, and all of a sudden, this dog must have been one of the neighbor's dogs. I never saw this dog before. The dog starts running around in circles, tight little circles, around and around and around and around. I thought to myself, sooner or later, that dog is going to get dizzy. So I thought to myself, how long can that dog run around in circles like that? So I checked my watch to time him. So I keep watching the dog, keep checking my watch, watching the dog, keep checking the watch. And all of a sudden, the dog stopped, and he walked away. And when I looked at my watch, he ran around in circles for 1 hour. And I thought to myself, who's crazier, that dog for running around in circles for an hour, or me for watching a dog run around in circles for an hour? So I thought to myself, that must mean I have a pretty boring life. So then I went online to try to figure out what makes a dog run around in circles at all, even for an hour. And I ran across this interesting article written by an animal psychologist, and they said this. They said dogs often will run around in circles because the dog believes that happiness is in its tail. And if the dog can catch its tail, it can catch itself some happiness. But for a dog, happiness is always elusive. It's always just right behind him, but he can never get a hold of it. Well, that also happens to be the same for people. You know, all of us, we try to capture happiness. We want to make happiness a part of our lives for a long time. But usually for most people, happiness is close. It's just right behind you, but it is elusive. We just can't grab it. And when we do, we can't seem to hold on to happiness that long. Well, that turns out to be the key message of today's gospel reading coming out of the 20th chapter of Matthew, verses 1 to 16. And what we're going to find out in today's gospel reading, the one thing that keeps most people from capturing happiness and holding on to it. But before we take a look at the gospel reading itself, I just have to set it up. Now, the gospel I just read, coming out again the 20th chapter of Matthew, verses 1 to 16, this story is centered in Palestine. The main product of Palestine was grapes. And in Palestine, grapes matured in mid-September. The rainy season started at the end of September. So for the landowners, the vineyard owners, they had a very small window of opportunity as grapes picked. And whenever it was time to pick those grapes, between mid-September, late September, they would hire as many people as they could find. So when they would go to the marketplace, anyone they would see standing idly around, they'd say, would you like to go work in my vineyard? So they hired people all day long. And every so often, when finally all their grapes got picked, they were so happy that the grapes were picked, they didn't rot on a vine, they would then be able to substantially and financially make a lot of money. They would pay everyone the same amount of money. And that's where the problem comes in with today's gospel reading. Let's take a look at verse 14, the 20th chapter of Matthew. So it says this, when the first came, that's the first group of workers hired early in the morning. So when these first group of workers came, they thought they would receive even more, but each of them also got the usual daily wage. And on receiving it, they grumbled against the landowners, saying, these last ones worked only 1 hour. You made them equal to us who bore the day's burden and the heat. So they were agitated and they were aggravated. They should have said what? We agreed to the usual daily wage. We're happy. We're satisfied. We made money. They should have took their wage and went away. Happy. But what made them not happy? Any idea? Why were they upset? Now, they were not only upset that they worked all day long, but the guys who were hired at 5 o'clock received the same wages as them. So clearly that made them aggravated. That made them mad. That kept them from being happy. But what allowed that to happen? There was something eating inside of them. What was it? Any idea? Jealousy, something a little bit more contagious than jealousy. Jealousy is a problem. But this thing can sometimes be more vile than jealousy. What was it? Greed is another thing that made him angry. Let's take a look at verses 15 and 16. We're going to find it right here. So the landowner said to this group who worked all day long and received the usual daily wage, my friend, I am not cheating you. He was not. Did you not agree with me for the usual daily wage? And the answer to that question is yes, they did. Then he said, take what is yours and go. What if I wish to give the last one the same as you? Or am I not free to do as I wish with my own money? And then here it is right there. Take a look at that last line. And he said to them, are you envious because I am generous? And the answer to that question is what? Yes, they were envious because he was generous. They were envious. Envy is so corrosive in our lives. One or two of you might be eaten away tonight by envy. Now, I looked the word up, and the word envy, envious, but the root word envy, comes from a French word. It's a French word. And it means this. Literally translated, envy means this: to be able to see far, but not close. Did you hear that? Envy means to be able to see far, but not close. So when envy festers inside of you, you can clearly see what your neighbor has, but you can't see what you have. You can see but not close. So when you become contaminated, and it's a contamination, when you become contaminated with envy, you become envious, you can see all the blessings everyone else has. He has a new car, he has a nice house, he has better kids, he has a nicer television, he has all these things, these people, and I don't have anything. Because you can clearly see what someone else has, you can't see what you have. And if you believe you don't have any blessings, any gifts, but everyone else, God's been so kind and so generous to me, what's going to happen to happiness in your life? It's gone. Instead of that first group of workers just being happy, look, we worked, we got a good wage, he didn't cheat us, we can support our families, what more do we want? They were stricken with envy. So instead of being happy, they were angry. How often in life that happens. There were these two farmers. They had adjacent farms. Now, one farmer was a happy farmer. He's always going around whistling and happy, and he was just content with what he had. The farmer had stricken with envy. He was a very envious man. And the envious farmer could not stand his neighbor, the happy farmer. He couldn't stand him whistling. He couldn't stand the smile on his face. He couldn't stand that he was happy. It just drove him nuts because he thought the happy farmer had it all. How can I take away some of what he has? If I could get rid of his blessings, maybe then I'll be happy for the first time in a long time. He devised a plan. He thought to himself, I know what I'll do. I'll get some arsenic, and in the middle of the night, I'm going to walk over to his farm, and I'm going to dump the arsenic into his well water. That's what I'll do. That's what he did. During the night, he got a big bucket of arsenic, and he went over, and he poured it into the well water of the happy farmer. The next day, both farmers were found dead. The happy farmer was dead. The envious farmer was dead. How did the envious farmer die? We know how the happy farmer died because, unfortunately, his well water was spiked with arsenic. But how did the envious farmer die? And here's what happened. What the envious farmer didn't realize is, although their wells were separated physically above the ground, they were connected underground by a large underground pool of water. And when he poured the arsenic in the well water of his neighbor, pouring it into his own water supply, and he killed himself. That's the trouble with envy. Are you suffering from envy tonight? Have you dealt with envy this week? There's probably a really good chance, and it's difficult to be inclusive, but have you dealt with envy at all in your life? Because one thing about envy, it is probably one of the biggest cancers we can deal with, because it just takes a smile right off your face when you become envious, when you can't see what you have, but you can see what the other one has. Then deep down inside you become resentful, angry, you despise God because you believe God has not done anything for me, only for my neighbor. And you find it difficult to laugh and to smile and be happy and be content, be pleased with what you have. Envy. The answer to that question, when the landowner said to those hired early in the morning, are you envious because I am generous? And the answer clearly was, yeah, we're envious. That's all it is. We're just envy people. We're just mean people. The prayer, if you have ever dealt with envy, and if you're dealing with it tonight, you say, Heavenly Father, keep me from being envious. Allow me to see what I have as opposed to what my neighbor has. Because there's a very good chance you have more than you deserve. You have more than you thought possible. I'll just leave you with this. I think it's beautiful. There's one of our retired priests in the diocese. I've known him for years. And every time, and this is from when I first met this man probably 30, 40 years ago. And for all these years, whenever I ask him the question, how are you doing? He always gives me a very interesting answer, and it's a beautiful answer. This is what he always says. I'll say, how are you doing? And this is his answer. He will always say, I'm doing better than I deserve. Isn't that a beautiful answer? That means he doesn't deal with envy, does he? Because if you're dealing with envy, you're not going to give that as an answer. When you realize, I can see what I have. I can see what the other guy has, but I can see what I have, and I'm totally, because it turns out to be, I have equal to or more than he does. Every time I ask this fellow, how are you doing? He always says this, I have doing better than I deserve. That's probably true for all of us. But it's not true when we become envious.